There is deepening concern across much of the world about how the United States is using its financial power and the influence of the dollar for ideological and for political ends. We've seen how the United States uses sanctions against countries that don't toe its line. But there is a new system that's now developed, an alternative system to using the dollar for international payments. It's being done by a group of countries, the BRICS countries. What is the new system? How does it work? And is it a durable alternative to the dollar?
Look, to be precise, I would say, to try to be precise, it's a complex issue. I would say that the developing countries, the BRICS countries, are still struggling to build alternatives. There's one country that's moved further away and has moved further in this direction, which is China. China's doing a lot to create alternative payment systems, alternative methods of financing that are required. But the BRICS as a group are still at the beginning of a process to create alternatives to the US dollar. It's a long process, it's a difficult process, it's politically charged, because you pointed out, you mentioned the financial sanctions that were applied by the United States and Europe in the last years. But in 2025, and now in the beginning of 2026, we have new factors. We have the use of tariffs, import tariffs, the wholesale break of international agreements by the United States, and the use of military force or threat of use of military force in a way that exacerbates what the American empire was doing before. So the challenge is immense right now. And it's not only monetary and financial, obviously, but in some cases, I would say countries are running existential threats, given the way the United States is behaving as an imperial power.
Now, as you point out, the BRICS countries are still working on finding a durable alternative system of international payments. What would this system be based on? Would it be a basket of currencies, or would it be relying on technologies like blockchain?
I think both things you mentioned would be present in an alternative system. But what we would need ultimately is to devise a way of creating an alternative currency, a new currency that would serve for international transactions and reserve holding purposes. But this is my opinion, an opinion of some economists in the BRICS, but it's not an official line. It has not been defined as an official objective even. So I would say that there's, when you look at the media, you have it's often, very often, an exaggerated impression of what the BRICS are achieving or are aiming at. Even Donald Trump, even before he became president, he exaggerated wildly the extent to which the BRICS as a group represent a threat to the United States dollar. He even accused the group of having been created to destroy the dollar, which is completely absurd. So we need to take our time. I think, of course, there's something that might change completely the picture, which is, imagine you have a new financial collapse in the United States of the scale that you had in 2008, 2009. That would be a watershed. That would bring new challenges, would weaken the dollar, probably, weaken the United States, and people would be scrambling for alternatives. That's why I've been making the point repeatedly in BRICS discussions in Brazil and China and Russia. I've been making the point that we need to get ready. We need to imagine alternative solutions in detail. But so far, the intellectual and political progress in this area has been, for me, frustrating, because I believe I'm one of the ones that since 2023, when the United States and Europe intensified the sanctions, notably against Russia, I've been of the belief that this is a major problem for the world. And if you look at the global South, the only countries that can get together to lead something in that direction are some of the BRICS. It's at least some of the BRICS.
How do the relatively new financial institutions like the New Development Bank, also known as the BRICS Development Bank, as well as the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. How do they fit into the rollout of trying to find a new alternative payment system?
That's the first step the BRICS actually took, and China with the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. That was back in 2015. We were conscious of the fact that we could not rely anymore on the hope of a reform, a large-scale reform of the World Bank and the IMF, and that we needed to build alternative mechanisms. 10 years have gone. I took part in that, as you know. 10 years have gone by since the BRICS took these major initiatives. And the progress has been, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I've worked enormously with the big BRICS during my last 10 years of activity as a policymaker and then as a researcher. But I'm quite conscious of the fact that even, for example, the New Development Bank that the BRICS created, of which I was a founding member, it has a long way to go to become a true world alternative to the World Bank. And the Chinese are well aware of that. I remember talking to my Chinese colleagues, and they always recommended patience, long-term thinking. These are not easy challenges. Anyway, I, as a Brazilian, more immediatist than the Chinese, I think we're moving slowly with respect to the New Development Bank, slowly with respect to alternatives to the dollar. But we're forced to take stances, because the way the United States behaves doesn't leave us many alternatives. We need to think of our own way of doing things, given the failure of the system that the West controls.
As you say, progress is very slow. What do you see as the main challenges?
I think there are two things. One is technical, because all these issues, a World Bank rival to the IMF, an alternative payment system to SWIFT, an alternative currency to the US dollar, all these issues are technically very complex. But there's also, more importantly, I would say, a political problem. See, all of the global South countries, with few exceptions, all of the BRICS, even Russia, even China, amazing as it may seem, are vulnerable to US pressure, to Western pressure, and are vulnerable to influence groups from within the countries that oppose anything that might represent a challenge to the West. That's true of Brazil, notably, much more than China or Russia, of course. It's true of South Africa, it's true of India, to speak only of the five members that created the New Development Bank. So we have what I often call a fifth column inside these countries, which work systematically to impede independent alternatives to the West. So it's not an easy process. It's challenging, and the U.S. has become so threatening. I will tell you quite frankly, when Donald Trump started making major threats against the BRICS because of the dollar, because of the supposed threat to the dollar, this frightened many people in the BRICS. Many people became very cautious, decided to delay discussions. I think it's a mistake, but the reality is that people in our countries are often vulnerable to American threats, except perhaps, I think we need to distinguish really. When you look at the global South, you need to distinguish Russia and China from the rest. Russia and China are countries that are capable of facing up to the threats and actions of the United States. Most countries in the global South are vulnerable, much more vulnerable. So it's not an easy life for those that want to see a different world.
The effort to find alternative systems, as you've pointed out, has been going on for some time. But I'm wondering, to what extent did that effort gain new urgency when we saw the manner in which the United States imposed financial sanctions against Russia in the aftermath of the Ukraine crisis?
This fact that you just mentioned was a watershed, because it became clear to everyone at the time, everyone responsible, that if the freezing of such a large amount of Russian reserves, around the equivalent of $300 billion, is possible, anything can happen. So countries like China, Iran, others began moving away from the dollar, moving their applications from U.S. treasuries to other assets that could be considered safe. No? And this has led, for example, to an explosion of gold prices since 2022. This is a reflection of the fact that the dollar is no longer seen as a safe haven. So you need to look for other safe havens. Can that be gold? Can that be silver? Can that be the Chinese renminbi? Can other currencies of Western countries do the job? All of this is occurring, these movements away from the US dollar into other alternatives. And if you look at the most recent data, you will see that for the first time, gold has a larger weight in international reserves as a whole than US dollar applications. This is completely unprecedented. The dollar is still the major currency, but gold has become a major rival to the United States as a reserve asset.